Welcome to the Igniting Change podcast. My name is Duncan Cook, founder of Three-Sided Cube, trusted technology partner for some world-changing organizations. We know the power that technology has to have a positive impact on people's lives. But on this podcast, myself and my co-hosts Puff and Sophie are out to meet the people behind the technology, hear their stories and understand what drives them, and hopefully inspire others to join the mission and do some good in the world.
Thank you very much for joining us. Lovely to have you on this episode of Igniting Change. Did you want to introduce yourself, tell us who you are, what organisation you're with, and what do you do?
Very good. I'm Peter Williams, once upon a time of the United Kingdom, now resident in the United States for 25 years. My academic background, believe it or not, my PhD is in politics. And my entire career has been a sort of mismanaged snail trail through lots of different professions. I started out as a management consultant. Well, I started out as a lobbyist. I then became a management consultant for what was then Coopers and Lybrand. That over the years became Coopers and Lybrand Deloitte, and then it became PricewaterhouseCoopers, and then one morning in 2002, IBM bought PricewaterhouseCoopers Consulting, and I was reading the papers and discovered I worked for IBM.
Is that actually what happened? Did you not know?
Well, kind of. We heard about it kind of 24 hours beforehand. In actual fact, we were literally about to become Monday Consulting, and nobody believed that this was going to work. Some advertising genius, and I use the term in inverted commas, had come up with the idea of Monday, as in, let's name it the worst day of the week, shall we? I actually still have. They'd issued us with our Monday business cards. I actually still have one pinned to a notice board. And for the longest time, the joke was that IBM stands for It Beats Monday. That was all true. And then while I was consulting, I was working for public and private sector. Became fascinated at the interplay between technology and business process, technology and society, and how one affects the other and the other affects the one, so to say. Then when I was working with IBM, I had the pleasure really of being made the Chief Technology Officer of what IBM at that time called Big Green Innovations, which was their environmental business startup unit. And I had a big hand in building IBM's water management business, a big hand in building what IBM later came to call smart cities. And from smart cities, the journey to disaster resilience was pretty short, because, a smart city that isn't disaster resilient isn't very smart, is it? And we saw lots of applications for technology there, and lots of, potential avenues for IBM. And I, was invited to lead that. I became IBM's representative to Arise, the fledgling organisation that at that time was set. This was in 2015, I think, or 14, maybe 14. Arise had been established by what was then UNISDR to build public-private collaboration in disaster risk reduction. I sort of was on the global board of Arise for a while and kind of helped pretty ineffectually actually get that going, although we did host an Arise global annual conference once upon a time in our place in Washington, DC. I was made up to what IBM calls a distinguished engineer around about the same time, and you can think of that basically as a long service award and well done for not being fired. I retired from IBM in 2018. I say retired in inverted commas because I've singularly failed to do less, which is the usual point of retiring. So I guess I'm going to have to go around again a few times, and until I get the hang of it. And today I chair the US network of Arise, and I'll say a bit more about that in a moment. And I also help some very large companies, Fortune 50 companies, figure out their European Union CSRD reporting requirements, their Scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions, and all of the kind of ESG stuff that they're now having to contend with. And for the longest time, I was under the impression that the public sector was a complete and total. I'm trying to think of a polite expression, a complete and total mess when it came to getting their act together. And actually, the mess that some of my large, prestigious private sector clients are in on the same thing shows me they're actually no better at all. They talk a better game and they're paid more, and that's about it. So it's that sort of dynamic.
And retirement seems to be going well for you then, Peter, because I feel like you're super busy. And I would really like to touch on the US Arise
Sure.
chapter, because you do so much for this for all of Arise really, but for the US piece.
So the bottom line is this, that disaster risk reduction, which is the title I prefer because that captures all of it, is intellectually the most absorbing problem I've ever come across, because it involves literally the whole of society. The governance, the politics, the sociology, the economics, the technology, the environment, and so on, right? And it all interacts in all kinds of incredibly complicated ways, and it just makes it an absorbing problem to try to solve. At the same time, you get to a certain point in your life and you start thinking, well, I want to give something back and I want to contribute something, and this seems to be a really good way of doing it. As the old adage has it, if you're enjoying something, you're probably doing it well. So that's how I came to it. Arise is it's a global organisation, but it's organised for the benefit of your listeners. It's organised into national networks. There's about 39 in the world at this point in time. It's very strong in the Americas, North and South. It's very strong in Southeast Asia. It's becoming strong in Africa and the Middle East. It's less prominent, although it's present in Europe. Although I suspect the reason for that is the European Union tends to do a bit more to kind of fill the vacuum of public-private collaboration. I've never really figured out why that would be the case, but that's my guess anyway. The US network, our membership consists of a range of companies ranging from very large insurers and engineers that you will have heard of for sure, down through medium-sized companies, through a bunch of disaster risk reduction specialists, some of them employing up to, I guess, about 50 or 100 people, something like that, down through a bunch of startups, and down to sole traders, individual LLCs, of which, as it happens, I'm one. We've got at this point in time, I believe, about 70 members. Everything, and a lot of other people that just kind of show up for the fun of it, I guess. There's everything we do is pro bono. And at this point in time, we've literally just this week acquired a legal entity through what's in the US, what's called a fiscal sponsorship arrangement. So we can now actually go out and attract funding and start doing this thing other than on an all volunteer basis. I was elected chair, just coming up for 4 years ago. I'm termed out actually in at the end of this year. I sort of took my job as one, building the value of the network so that people would find it worth their while joining, encouraging people to contribute to the various projects we got going on, building collaboration with other organisations like FEMA and various universities and so on and so forth, because that added value to the network and was another reason for people to join us, and continuing the tradition that Arise US had of developing things like scorecards and analytic frameworks for cities to use. When I was with IBM, I had the pleasure of working with a team from AECOM, Dale Sands, who's still active in Arise, and a guy called Michael Nolan, who to basically write the UN's first version of the UN City Disaster Resilience Scorecard. That's been through about 3-4 iterations. It's been translated into 16 languages or something, 15 languages, something like that. And it must have been used now. We don't actually track who uses it because it's open source, but it must have been used by at least 400 cities around the world. That's the best estimate. And it might be.
It's amazing. Like, that's actually amazing. And that's all organic, isn't it? That's not anything you've been pushing out from a marketing perspective. That's all just happened through word of mouth. Yeah,
people are clearly kind of looking out for the stuff that we do now, because just as an example, as you know, we've just done the wildfire scorecard. We've no idea how it found its way to Greece, but it's being used in Greece right now. It's been translated into Greek. We don't know who told them about it. Maybe they found it on Prevention Web and just downloaded it. I guess that's the most obvious thing. But it's good. They're using it. They got a problem. They think this is a fix. It's also been used in Argentina, and it just sort of spreads. And then the various addenda that we've got. The public health addendum that we wrote was that's used by at least 2 entire countries. It's either Algeria or Morocco, and if anybody from either of those places is listening, forgive me, but it's one or the other. And Suriname, and a whole bunch of cities as well. It predates COVID, but interest in it absolutely ballooned during COVID.
Just amazing that I mean, it makes the world feel like such a small place, because actually this is a challenge that affects everyone, and you put it so eloquently at the start. It's all absorbed, like all consuming. Like this is a huge challenge that everyone is facing, and I think the fact that people are actively going online and searching for solutions to some of these challenges, these more targeted challenges, shows that there's going to be, I think there's more demand for support and more of a network in this space to try and overcome some of these challenges. I mean,
I totally agree. I totally agree. And on the one hand, sometimes you hear of other scorecards and you go, well, why did you bother doing that, given that we've already got one? And then you think to yourself, well, if they bring a different perspective to it, or they cover something that we don't, then great, And it's the same, there's the Rockefeller Foundation scorecard. You remember the original Rockefeller 100 RC initiative? They had a scorecard which they developed. In fact, Arup, I believe, the engineering firm, developed for them, and it's a really nifty instrument. But when you look at it, it actually takes a completely, a distinctively different perspective than what we do. Therefore, they're complementary. And there are several cities. Mexico City is one I happen to be aware of that have used both to different effects. So, as you say, there's plenty of scope for these things to coexist. What would be great is if someone wants to sit down, if anybody's listening and wants to do a cross-reference to say, okay, if you've answered this question on this scorecard, you don't have to answer that question on that scorecard. That'd be cool. I'm not volunteering for that, by the way.
with all that time that you've got on your hands, Peter, in retirement, which is quite
I don't think so. I don't think so. But it's great. And pumping these things out has become part of what Arise US does. Arise Mexico, by contrast, is a very strong organization, very well set up, but their focus is on actually going out into small towns and villages in Mexico and helping them build more resilient stuff. That's a legacy of the fact that they had a major sponsor for a long time, Cemex, the big Mexican cement company, and they've kind of carried on that tradition. So their focus and their shtick is much more kind of hands-on. Whereas our focus at this point, it could well change. I'd like for it to change actually to a degree, is providing the intellectual frameworks and the analytic tools and so on and so forth to help people actually figure out where they are.
And certainly, so I came to, I can't remember how, I mean, how did I come across the Arise Network? I'm sure someone had said, and I think I'd reached out, and then it's an amazing network of really helpful, friendly, knowledgeable people that are essentially experts in their fields, that are quite passionate about this space and want to, like you, Peter, offer their time and energy and expertise to.
You look at the talent and the expertise of some of the people that we've got working for us. It's kind of. It just makes me scratch my head sometimes. I go, how the hell did that happen? It's really cool. Actually, it really is.
There's I don't know if we can give a nod to it, so it might be that we need to edit this out, Peter. But there is a report that's being worked on right now. I know that you in particular are very heavily involved in the AI chapter, for example, and when you look at some of the people collaborating in that chapter alone, I was like, oh my gosh, NASA
Yeah.
are involved. Like so many, like there are so many amazing people, very
Yeah.
knowledgeable, very like
Yeah.
passionate about the space, and you know it's coming together, and it's coming together really nicely. So maybe we can give a link to that when that's ready, or maybe
Yeah, that
I
would
don't
be, that'd be 100% fine. Yeah, that's no problem at all. I'm sure they'd welcome it. So yeah,
cool.
and you know, you're a contributor to it as well. So you know,
On the team, the three-sided cube team are. I'm
yeah,
there
well, right,
to facilitate.
right. I mean,
um,
that report is a great example, really, of why DRR is such an interesting subject, right?
hmm,
You know, AI is obviously this huge movement, for want of a better term, trend. I don't know, I can't think of the right word really. That's sort of kicked off, and you know, you got all the different types of AI, and people are getting all bent out of shape about large language models, and you know, and then going back to different kinds of machine learning and so on and so forth. It's just this huge kind of thing. You apply it to disaster risk reduction, and it becomes immediately a great example of everything that's good about AI and everything that's bad about it.
yeah,
Um, there's no question that it will allow people to be more resilient. There's no question that it will save lives. There's no question that it will save livelihoods and economies and so on and so forth. But on the other hand, there are huge risks with it as well. You know, there's stuff going wrong right when you need it. Quite apart from the bias that might be inherent in some of the data that's actually been loaded into it, and so forth. You know, the privacy implications, and so on. And people actually taking what it says. You remember when you know GPS or sat nav, as you would call it, first came out. You know, there were these apocryphal stories of people listening to the sat nav even when it told them to drive into a river. They still
yeah,
drove into a river.
yeah,
Well, you're going to get that in spades with artificial intelligence. You know, the tool said we've got to do this, therefore we've got to do it. Well, you know, the risk is that people won't apply the sanity check to it before they do it,
yeah,
and you know, that becomes a real that's one of the potential downsides of it right there. Quite apart from the lack of equity. So I was just reading a report in the Economist actually last night about how artificial intelligence is failing to have the same impact in Africa at this point than it has elsewhere. And that's a function of bandwidth and cloud access and so on and so forth. And it's not the lack of internet connections to Africa, it's the function of lack of bandwidth inside various Africa, within and between African countries.
yeah,
I say that article's in this week's Economist, I think. And that's an example of the downside in terms of the lack of equity. You know, is it morally defensible that let's say a North American city has access to these tools that could help it deal with, let's say, a heat wave or something like that, and some African city that could absolutely use the same tools does not have access? You know, I'm not pressing for everything to be free and handed out because the bigger issue the bigger issues are much more structural.
yeah.
You
But
know,
but it's giving a nod. It's having some consideration for the fact that these are real challenges that we're facing now,
yeah,
and it's
yeah,
only going to escalate. Like it's not getting better. We had an amazing guest not too long ago, a lady called Rhonda, and she has done an incredible piece of work. And she's basically turned it into almost like a training module to help people get a better understanding of how important equity is for these new types of technologies that are coming out, and how that
yeah.
impacts. And I think this to me is, I say, quite an exciting space, because I see so much opportunity for real positive impact here if we can solve some of these
Oh, I
challenges.
highly agree. I mean, and you don't need to look at Africa. Look all the way to Africa to find places where it could add value. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm about 20 miles, I guess, inland from San Francisco. Between me and San Francisco, you've got what are called the flatlands, the eastern edge of San Francisco Bay. Those are the poorest areas, poorest parts of the Bay Area for the most part. They are right on the Hayward Fault. They are at the lowest elevation above sea level. Their buildings are the oldest. They're the least likely to have to comply with codes that will give them any measure of resilience. They've got the least community resources to actually deal with whatever happens, and they've got the least resources to help them rebuild afterwards. And that's just here in San Francisco. You go, you compare, the Athertons and the different parts of Silicon Valley on the one hand, and places like Haywood and San Leandro on the other, or East Oakland, and the flatland part of Oakland and Fruitvale and whatnot, and you'll instantly get what I'm talking about. It's there's a massive extra. Oh, and by the way, a lot of the people who live there just so happens they're not white.
Yeah.
So you've got you've got that issue structurally.
Yeah.
And for as long as it was, I'll use this term in quotes, merely about opportunity and so forth, people could sort of, unfortunately, turn their shut their conscience off to that and kind of say, okay, well, we're giving some money to it and so on and so forth, and we've done our bit. This is actually about whether or not they're going to live through a disaster.
Yeah.
And that to me just seems to be, if we can allow that situation to persist, that seems to me to be a fairly sick situation. But it's structural. No individual is to blame. It's the legacy of a ton of history and a ton of sometimes misguided decisions or a ton of unanticipated consequences. And if you're going to make the whole of society more resilient, we got to figure out ways to unpick it.
Yeah, totally agree. And not that's a really lovely. There's some really lovely specific examples there, and I don't know why. Every time I start talking about this, I feel really anxious because I'm like, they forecast one of the strongest hurricane seasons on record, I think, this season coming up, haven't they? I'm not making this up. I'm sure there was a report.
No, yeah, they have. And by the way, you live in Florida.
No, I know.
Just saying.
I know, and I'm not laughing because it's not funny. But it just, things are getting worse. They're not getting better. So it's like, the more that we can be shining a light on some of the really awesome solutions that are in place or happening right now or have been happening, I think it's spreading that positivity.
Part of the issue is the solution's half the problem. Getting someone to use it is the other half of the problem. And I could give you a brilliant example. There's a place down a little bit south and west of here called Pajaro, near not far from Santa Cruz.
Okay.
They had a major flood. Just trying to think when it was. Not this winter just gone, but the winter prior. And they had a broken levee. The entire town of Pajaro was basically flooded out for some days. It's a heavily Hispanic, heavily agricultural town. Average incomes are a lot lower. Property values are a lot lower. The levee failed. It had been known for many, many years, about 40 years, that levee was suspect. The Army Corps of Engineers, when it allocated resources, used a methodology that gave undue weight to the value of the property that would be protected by the levee as building the business case for it. And that's basically the reason why that levee was never replaced. And the result was the town of Pajaro effectively needs rebuilding. And a lot of lives need rebuilding and so on and so forth as well. Nobody in the Army Corps of Engineers, I'm willing to bet, said, let's leave that like that so places like Pajaro get screwed over. Nobody did that. It's the entire sort of, I'm just trying to think of the word, the framework within which the decisions are made, and these assumptions that are so kind of tacit and automatic, having the foresight to be able to look through that and go, you know what, that is going to have a horrible consequence. We need to do something about that right now. And actually, the Army Corps has done something about it right now. Too late, but hopefully it will never happen again. So just as an example, as I say, none of this stuff is necessarily intentional, and I'm not saying that it is. I'm just saying that as a result of accumulated decisions over the years, that's been the result. And disaster risk reduction shines a very harsh light on that. In terms of, okay, so how do we prevent that from happening again? And how do we systematically prevent it from happening again?
Because I think this space is actually really good at looking and learning from previous incidents and disasters, essentially, and
Yes.
using those insights and learnings to inject them and move forward from them so that they don't happen again on the same scale, right? So it's always
Yeah.
about progress forward.
Well, yes and no. Unfortunately, those lessons aren't always learned. With the Paradise wildfire, there are a lot of lessons were learned there around vegetation management, around better regulation of the electricity utility, around better management of evacuation routes, better warning systems, and so on and so forth. Exactly those same lessons have now been learned all over again in Lahaina.
Why? So what? Why? Why
Because
are we
yeah,
learning the same lessons again and again?
yeah, it's a great question, and it's kind of they're totally different states, right? They're two, you would think, completely different biomes, therefore completely different fire risks. You know, one's a subtropical or tropical island, one's a mountain forest, coniferous forest. Um, and I think the assumption was that, yeah, we're different. It would never happen here. And it turned out that around Lahaina they had a vegetation problem. It turned out that the utilities had, the utility, with the benefit of hindsight, could have done with, shall we say, better regulation. In both, I believe, in Paradise and Lahaina, in neither place was the water system adequate to generate enough pressure to put the fire out. And so on. So there are so many lessons from Paradise that, although the actual look and feel of them in Lahaina is different, they're fundamentally the same lesson, and they weren't learned.
Well, it might be. It's not that they weren't learned. They might have been aware of them, but they just didn't. They didn't action.
They were probably just. I mean, that's a reasonable point actually. So if you've got a 30-year program of action required to make you more resilient, and your disaster happens in year two, well, yeah, you're going to come off badly. That's fair enough. I can't say that the lessons weren't learned, but they had not been responded to yet,
Yeah.
for whatever reason.
Gosh, Peter, you are full of like incredible examples. I think in every working group that I've been with you, like you're a fountain of knowledge. Like you have so many examples.
My wife calls me a fountain of useless facts. And yeah, I don't know. It's a quirk of the way my brain works. I can't remember what the hell I'm supposed to be doing in an hour's time, but I can remember all the chemical ingredients of the shampoo I used in the bath when I was 4 years old. You know.
So tell me, Peter, is there an example of tech for good, right? That you would that you have been a part of, or that you have played a part of, that you would like to share with us today, that you're proud of?
um, there's one I was not part of, but I love.
Okay.
Was the whole after the Nepalese earthquake, one of the Nepalese earthquakes. I've had a few. It was instantly realised that all of the maps and GIS were hopelessly out of date and hopelessly wrong. And I believe I'm right in saying there was a large crowdsourced effort to take satellite photos, I guess,
Yeah.
and basically bring the GIS up to date. That, I think, and this work was factored out around the world, and I would think that's a pretty good example of tech for good, right?
I think it's a great example, and I think it's something that is pretty topical. And I think we're only going to be seeing more and more of it as we
Right,
progress, and as
right,
I say, the importance or the adoption of AI increases three, fourfold. Like it's just
right.
becoming more of a thing. But that crowdsourced data and data and the quality of data, I think, is going to be extremely important. And I think a really quick and efficient way of doing that is crowdsourcing that information. Satellite imagery, we have interestingly, we have a project with World Resources Institute that uses satellite imagery that then gets essentially confirmed by people on the ground that it is an accurate picture of what's happening in particular places.
I'll give you another example, one I have had a small role in. And full disclosure, I'm an advisor to one of the companies in this space, which is how I've had a role in it. It's increasingly possible to forecast 6 months and 1 year out on any given day what the weather is going to be like with the same accuracy as the nightly weather forecast.
What?
Yeah, it is. And I work for one of the companies that does that. I happen to believe their technology anyway makes them sort of market leaders. And they will quite literally tell you, okay, I want to get married on May the 24th, 2025. What's the weather going to be like?
And it's accurate to like.
It's not 100% accurate. It is as accurate as the nightly weather forecast from the night before.
There, that's amazing. And how long have they been doing that? A long time, or?
They've been building their models. So it all started with the IPCC, and there's a couple of the two principals of the company worked for as part of the IPCC. They were at one of the US government research labs, and they were involved with the IPCC there. And they have applied various forms of AI to the existing physics-based models, and increasingly to ocean temperature models and so forth, to learn some extraordinary, to develop some extraordinary capabilities about figuring out what your probability is of, let's say, a high rainfall event over the coming season. It's seasonal weather forecasting, if you will, but in massive detail. And by the way, the spatial resolution is extraordinary as well. It's not just the time resolution. The spatial resolution is down to about, it's certainly well less than the 12 square kilometres that the 12 kilometres square, excuse me, that the National Weather Service uses.
I mean, this sounds incredible. And what are they? How are people using that data and
Well, at the moment, the stuff is being used to forecast wildfire risk with a much higher level of specificity. They are forecasting solar irradiance to allow people to make better decisions about the amount of energy coming off of solar installations, and configure the grid around those based on what renewable energy is going to be available. They've got a bunch of other things going on as well, but those are the kinds of things that they do.
That's amazing. Actually amazing. Oh my gosh.
I wish I could mention that. I wish I could mention the name of the company. You know who they are.
No, I know. It's a shame we can't give them a nod. Oh my gosh, that's actually amazing. And okay, so that's an incredible example. Any other examples? I don't know if you're going to beat that though, Peter. I feel like that's quite a goodie.
There's one we're trying to get built, and I've been heavily involved in this for a long time, and we've drawn a blank at this point. Many cities can tell you at least some of their critical assets. They don't necessarily have a complete list of their critical assets, and above all, what they don't have is any indication or any idea of how those assets are linked. One of the things that happens with disasters is you get cascading failures, so that if a water treatment plant goes out, you're going to lose a hospital. And if you lose a hospital, that's half your dialysis capability. So you get the cascading failure from one to the next sort of thing. And oftentimes those cascading failures come as a horrible surprise to the city that's trying to deal with a flood or a hurricane or something like that. We are trying to build a tool. We conceived ourselves the idea of building a tool called a critical asset management system, CAMS, to allow people to take an inventory of their critical assets and just plot the links, so that they could get an instant view of, okay, if X fails, then this, and this is going to fail as well. And what do we do about that? And this was intended to be a tool to assist with scenario planning in advance of an event, and a tool to assist with event response. The company that was building it for us unfortunately went broke in the middle, and went out of business. So everything shuddered to a halt. We are now trying to get that restarted, and we may get that going through a couple of organisations. I don't want to name them out of fairness to them, but in Canada. So we may be able to get it going through that again. But again, if anybody's listening and they got a yen for this thing, we've got all the design documentation. It's all there on GitHub. So if anybody's listening and wants to have a go at building this thing using GeoNode or any of the other OpenGIS tools or something like that, then let me know. Basically.
It's a good shout out because I might know a developer or two, Peter. So that might be of interest. Okay, and I have absolutely loved chatting with you, and there's been some amazing examples that you have highlighted today. I do want to come back to the point that you made right at the very start in terms of disaster risk reduction. It is all encompassing. Like, this is a space
Right.
that affects everyone. It doesn't just affect those that work in.
Well, it's not just everyone, it's everything.
Yeah, very, very true.
Remember how Bill Gates said the internet changes everything? Well, so does DRR.
But it's true, and I think it's very easy for people to think, well, I don't work in this space, but actually this, as you said, it affects everyone and everything. So I think if people do have time, people need to start thinking about this way more than they perhaps have historically. And I think this is going to be something that crops up in a lot more spaces than it has done historically. So
yeah, with no question. And unfortunately, there is a strong tendency and it's human nature, right, for people and cities and organisations to get really, really passionate about it after they've had a disaster.
Yeah.
So the classic example, I suppose, would be somewhere like the Netherlands. They had their never again moment after the floods in 1952. Since when they've become the best flood managers and the best water managers in the world. So that's a great example. It's human nature, unfortunately. But what we've got to try and do is just figure out ways to get just enough action to reduce the worst of the damage before it happens, as opposed to afterwards.
Very, very true.